The sun hadn't even risen over Arlington Cemetery, but the crisp morning air already carried whispers of anticipation. Tourists shuffled nervously along the marble paths, cameras poised, unaware of the silent tension building near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Standing perfectly still, the tomb guard's eyes scanned the crowd not with fear, but with a quiet, unwavering resolve. Every muscle in his body radiated discipline, every breath measured. He had trained for moments like this. Yet nothing in his decades of service could prepare him for what was about to unfold. From across the plaza, a sleek black SUV approached, engine growling like a predator. Behind the wheel sat a man whose arrogance seemed almost tangible. Eboli, powerful politician with a reputation for testing boundaries wherever he went. Rumor had it he had challenged guards before, thinking a decorated veteran would step aside for someone of his stature. But this tomb guard was not just any soldier. He had seen war. He had lost friends. He had witnessed chaos the world refused to acknowledge. And today, that calm stillness would be tested in ways no one expected. The crowd shifted as the SUV rolled closer, tires crunching against the gravel, the sound startling a young boy clutching his mother's hand. Reporters raised their cameras, sensing the brewing confrontation. The air seemed to tighten with every heartbeat, every second stretching into an eternity. A whisper passed through the veterans and the crowd. Watch him. He's not just standing there, he's waiting for the moment to define honor. The politician stepped out, a smirk tugging at his lips. Move aside, he commanded, his voice carrying the sharp confidence of someone used to bending the world to his will. The guard didn't flinch, not an inch, not a word. Silence hung heavy, thick enough to be felt. The crowd collectively held its breath, sensing the collision of pride and power, experience and entitlement, and then, as if the universe demanded it, a quiet murmur rippled through those watching. The night before, an old veteran from a nearby neighborhood had stopped by the tomb guard's barracks. His truck had broken down, right outside the gates. Without hesitation, the guard had fixed it, hands steady, eyes calm, pride hidden beneath layers of discipline. That small act of kindness the world would later see was about to ignite a storm far bigger than anyone anticipated. The politician laughed, thinking the guard's stillness was weakness, but the crowd already knew the truth. Stillness was not submission. Stillness was a shield forged in battle, a testament to decades of unwavering service. And in the next moments, as cameras rolled and whispers turned to gasps, the world would witness a lesson in honor and respect that no power could intimidate. The guard's gaze never wavered. The SUV, the politician, the crowd, it all faded into insignificance. One thing mattered: discipline. One moment would prove that courage wasn't loud. It was still, it was steady, and it could silence even the most arrogant of challengers. Before the world saw him standing stoically at Arlington, the tomb guard had been through storms the public could never imagine. He wasn't born into the uniform. He earned every stripe, every medal, every scar etched into his body and soul. His hands, steady now as they gripped the rifle, had once trembled on the battlefield, shaking not with fear, but with grief over comrades lost beside him, friends who had promised to watch his back, friends who had laughed at his jokes one moment and been gone the next, leaving him to face the unimaginable silence of war. He had joined the service not for glory or recognition, but for a promise he made in the quiet moments after tragedy, a promise that no soldier, no sacrifice, would be forgotten. Arlington wasn't just a place, it was hallowed ground, a living monument to courage and loss. Every step he took along its marble paths, every disciplined movement of his rifle, was a tribute to those who had given everything. Discipline was not habit, it was devotion. Yet the tomb guard was more than his past. He had neighbors who knew him simply as Mr. Davis, a quiet man with calloused hands and a gentle smile. The day before, an old veteran from the neighborhood had stopped by, stranded with a broken-down truck. Without hesitation, the tomb guard had walked over, tools in hand, and fixed it. No reward, no recognition, just a nod and a quiet "take care." That small kindness, unnoticed by most, was a reflection of his character, steadfast, selfless, and unshakable. Little did anyone know, that very act would ripple into a confrontation no one could predict. Across Arlington, the other figure in this story carried an entirely different energy. The politician was a man accustomed to bending rules, challenging tradition, and watching others shrink beneath his authority. A public figure whose every gesture screamed control, whose presence alone intimidated subordinates and onlookers alike. Reports had surfaced of prior incidents, guards embarrassed, challengers humiliated, but here, in this sacred place, he was about to meet a discipline he hadn't bargained for. His reputation for arrogance was legendary, yet it would falter against a quiet courage he had no frame of reference for. The location itself amplified the stakes. Arlington Cemetery wasn't just a backdrop, it was a character in this drama. The white marble tombs gleamed under the morning light, a stark contrast to the polished black of the politician's SUV. Flags fluttered in the breeze, each one a silent witness to history and sacrifice. Tourists, veterans, and families wandering the grounds felt the weight of memory pressing down on them. Even before the confrontation began, every monument, every plaque, was a reminder that some things, honor, duty, respect were non-negotiable, and some lessons could not be learned through fear alone. The tomb guard's training kicked in automatically. Years of repetitive drills, of memorizing every inch of the ceremonial square, had prepared him for moments of scrutiny but not for the tension radiating. From a man who thought power could bend tradition, he noticed the subtle signals, the slight shift of the politician's jaw, the way his entourage's cameras were already rolling, the murmurs of the crowd that had started to gather. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight, as though sensing the impending clash. Inside the crowd, whispers spread quickly. Parents held their children closer. Veterans exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the posture, the aura, the readiness of someone who had faced both the battlefield and the endless patience of ceremonial duty. Reporters, sensing the brewing story, adjusted lenses and microphones, hungry for a viral moment. But for the guard, none of it mattered. The ceremony of stillness, the ritual of discipline, and the silent tribute to the fallen were all that held weight in this place. And yet, beyond discipline and duty, the guard carried a personal stake in what was about to unfold. The honor of his unit, the memory of fallen friends, and the unspoken promise to every soldier who had stood where he stood before. All these threads wove together into a quiet intensity that could not be broken. He knew that one misstep, one falter, could turn reverence into chaos. And he also knew that some lessons of respect, humility, and the power of stillness could not be learned quietly. Meanwhile, the politician moved with the practiced arrogance of someone who believed the rules were his to bend. His entourage fanned out, cameras already recording every motion, capturing the setup for what he assumed would be an embarrassment for the guard. He didn't yet understand that this man's silence wasn't fear, it was the calm before a storm. The world had yet to witness. At that moment, the sun broke fully over the horizon, illuminating Arlington in a golden glow. Shadows lengthened across the memorial stones, casting long, dramatic lines. It was as if the cemetery itself had paused, holding its breath, and in that golden light, the world saw two forces about to collide. One, a man shaped by battle, duty, and unwavering respect for the fallen. The other, a man shaped by ambition, entitlement, and the illusion of power. The guard's hands rested lightly on his rifle. His eyes scanned the crowd, the SUV, the politician. Every inch of him was prepared for what was coming, but not with aggression, not with bravado, but with the weight of honor. For this wasn't about winning. It wasn't about fame. It was about showing the world that some things, respect, courage, transcend ego, wealth, and position. And as the first murmurs of anticipation rippled through the crowd, Arlington seemed to whisper its own warning. Some lessons are written in silence, and some confrontations are etched into history before a word is even spoken. The polished black SUV came to a deliberate halt, the gravel crunching under its tires like the heartbeat of a city holding its breath. The politician stepped out, entourage in tow, his polished shoes clicking against the marble path. Cameras were already rolling, capturing every movement, anticipating the inevitable. He approached the tomb guard with the confident stride of a man used to authority bending to his will. Yet Arlington had a rhythm all its own, and it demanded respect. "Step aside," the politician ordered, voice sharp, polished, and dripping with entitlement. The words echoed across the quiet plaza, startling a group of schoolchildren and drawing the gaze of veterans who instinctively knew this would not end quietly. A few tourists instinctively raised their phones, expecting a spectacle. But the tomb guard did not move, not an inch, not a blink. Silence radiated from him like a tangible shield. His eyes locked onto the politician, steady, unwavering, carrying the weight of decades of service and the unspoken understanding that some things own a duty. Respect cannot be bargained. The politician's smirk faltered slightly as he realized this man wasn't intimidated. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, voice rising. His entourage laughed nervously, unsure whether to intervene. The crowd's murmur grew, curiosity and tension blending into a collective suspense. The children clutched their parents' hands tighter. Veterans shifted, fists tightening. recognizing the ritual of challenge they had seen in barracks, training grounds, and battlefields. The guard's response was silence. Not disrespect, not fear, but a quiet assertion of authority forged in fire and grief. Each breath measured, each muscle controlled. He stood as if he were carved from the marble of Arlington itself. The crowd sensed it immediately. This was not a man who could be coerced. This was a man whose stillness spoke louder than any shouted demand. The politician, growing frustrated, took a step closer. He gestured dismissively toward the guard. Move now. Cameras followed every motion, some capturing the arrogance, others framing the tension like a cinematic showdown. The guard did not budge. The tension in the plaza thickened, a fog of anticipation settling over the onlookers. Even the birds seemed to hold their wings mid-flap, sensing the fragile balance between civility and chaos. He tried again, this time with a sharper tone. Do you understand who you're standing in front of? The guard's eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, not in anger, but in quiet challenge. The message was clear: respect is earned, not demanded. And that earned respect would soon prove stronger than entitlement. The crowd was on edge. Reporters leaned forward, capturing every silent second. Veterans whispered among themselves, recounting their own experiences, testing authority, recognizing the slow build of tension like a ticking clock. Children, sensing something extraordinary, stayed silent, mesmerized by the guard's stillness. Tourists snapped photos, their shutter clicks punctuating the charged atmosphere like a drumbeat. The politician's next move was subtle but deliberate, a step closer, almost brushing against the guard. A tiny gesture, meant to provoke. The guard's eyes remained locked, his posture unchanged, his discipline absolute. The crowd gasped at the audacity of the challenge, sensing that lines were being tested, that respect was being weighed in real time. Then the first whispers of outrage began to ripple through the crowd. Can he do that? One veteran muttered. That's a tomb guard, a parent whispered to a child. Cameras shifted, catching the slight indifference of the guard, contrasting sharply with the politician's escalating arrogance. Every second stretched, every movement magnified by the collective anticipation of onlookers. The politician, sensing he was losing control of the narrative, raised his voice louder. Do you even know who you're dealing with? Some in the crowd flinched at the harshness, the clash of entitlement against calm authority. The guard, as always, remained motionless. His discipline was a wall, impenetrable and unmoving. And then, the tipping point, a shove. A subtle push, meant to test patience, meant to humiliate, but it miscalculated entirely. The guard did not stumble. He did not react impulsively. His eyes bore into the politician's, unyielding, unwavering. The crowd's collective breath hitched. Veterans straightened instinctively, sensing the history behind those eyes, the weight of every battlefield, every lost friend, every night spent in disciplined watch over the sacred. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to audible gasps. Cameras zoomed in, children's eyes widened. The politician, sensing the growing tension, tried to mask his uncertainty with bluster. He gestured again, louder, his voice cutting through the still morning. But the guard remained silent. Not silent because he feared reprisal, but because his response had already begun in the unspoken language of discipline. That the crowd felt it's the shift from anticipation to awe. This was no ordinary standoff. This was a lesson unfolding in real time, that honor does not shout, that courage is not loud, and that true strength often resides in stillness. The politician's face began to show cracks, confidence giving way to confusion, arrogance giving way to recognition. He had encountered men before, yes, but never one who could embody both absolute calm and absolute authority in the same moment. From the periphery, the old veteran who had been helped the day before watched silently, understanding the symmetry. The guard's act of kindness yesterday had not just been a repair of a vehicle, it was a symbol of character. And now, character stood before entitlement, quiet yet undeniable, commanding the attention of everyone present. The guard's posture, the unwavering gaze, the disciplined silence, all of it became the story. The plaza had transformed from a mere ceremonial ground to a stage where the moral weight of every choice, every action, and every act of disrespect was measured and judged. And in that moment, the crowd realized that they were witnessing more than a confrontation. They were witnessing the embodiment of respect, patience, and courage distilled into one human presence. Even as the politician tried one last provocation, an over-the-top gesture meant to humiliate, the guard did not waver. The world seemed to pause, collectively holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. And yet, in the midst of rising tension, the guard's calm remained absolute, an immovable testament to the truth that some forms of power, the power of honor, discipline, and dignity cannot be forced, only demonstrated. The first subtle applause began, barely audible at first, then swelling as veterans, parents, and even bystanders acknowledged the courage on display. Cameras continued to roll, capturing the tension, the stillness, and the subtle yet profound lesson that was unfolding. Every shove, every harsh word, every arrogant gesture was being absorbed, processed, and ultimately nullified by the guard's unwavering presence. By the end of the escalation, the crowd no longer focused on the politician, they were focused on the tomb guard. The once arrogant figure now seemed smaller, diminished not by force, but by the quiet, undeniable authority of someone who had lived through war, understood loss, and had learned that silence, discipline, and patience could speak louder than any shout. And as Arlington watched in solemn witness, the tension reached its peak, the stage set for the turning point, the moment when the true power of honor would finally make itself known. The morning air had thickened with tension, almost suffocating in its intensity. Arlington Cemetery, usually a place of solemn reverence, now pulsed with anticipation. The crowd, tourists, families, veterans stood frozen, cameras poised, hearts pounding. Even the wind seemed to still, as if holding its breath for what was about to unfold. The politician's patience had frayed. He had tested boundary spoken commands, subtle shoves, thinly veiled threats, but the tomb guard had not wavered. Not a step, not a glance aside, not a reaction. Silence had become the guard's most powerful weapon, and the politician's arrogance was crumbling under its weight. Then came the crossing of a line no one could ignore. With a deliberate gesture, the politician reached out and roughly grabbed the guard's rifle, yanking it slightly to emphasize his dominance. The crowd gasped collectively, a sharp, audible intake of breath that echoed across the marble paths. Children clutched parents' hands tighter, veterans' fists clenched instinctively. Even the birds that had dared to fly above paused mid-flight, wings suspended, as if sensing the moral gravity of the moment. Time seemed to slow. The politician's smirk had vanished, replaced by confusion and a hint of fear, the first crack in his carefully constructed facade. He had expected compliance, a submissive bow to his authority. Instead, he faced absolute stillness, unwavering discipline, and the silent power that needed no words. The guard's eyes, calm and measured, locked onto the politician's. There was no anger, no threat, only a profound statement of principle. Every movement, every line of posture, every controlled breath radiated the same message: disrespect will not be tolerated. Honor cannot be bargained. The crowd felt it instantly. The plaza, Arlington's hallowed ground, seemed to vibrate with collective awareness. Murmurs rose to whispers, whispers rose to audible gasps. Veterans nodded subtly among themselves, recognizing the subtle signals of someone who had faced true chaos and emerged disciplined, unbroken, unshaken. Tourists raised their phones, capturing not a spectacle of aggression, but a lesson in courage, composure, and moral authority. The politician, sensing his control slipping further, attempted to intimidate again. His voice rose, harsh and sharp. "Do you know who I am? Do you realize the consequences if you before the threat could finish?" The guard moved not impulsively, not with rage, but with a precision honed by decades of service. With a single, fluid motion, he positioned himself perfectly, maintaining ceremonial discipline, and executed a subtle maneuver that restored full control of the rifle to himself. Not a shout, not a fight, just measured action, silent yet devastating in its effect. The crowd collectively gasped. Cameras captured every second, the world now on edge. The politician staggered slightly, caught off guard by the guard's calm authority. He had assumed force would bend the guard's will. He had assumed bluster would frighten, commands would intimidate. But the tomb guard's discipline was a living force, invisible yet absolute, and the crowd could feel it pressing down like an unyielding weight. And then came the moment that would define the story. The politician, desperate and humiliated, reached forward in a final, reckless attempt to assert dominance, this time shoving the guard, a blatant, public act of disrespect. The crowd collectively froze. Cameras whirred, children's eyes widened, parents gasped, veterans instinctively straightened, sensing the moral boundary had been breached. But the guard's response was not anger. It was not aggression. It was a demonstration of control so precise and shocking that it rendered the entire plaza silent. With a slow, deliberate movement, he adjusted his stance, held the rifle at ceremonial attention, and with the faintest tilt of his head, indicated in perfect form that the line had been crossed and the consequences were unavoidable. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs, and whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? A veteran whispered to a companion. He didn't strike him, he didn't even raise his voice, but he made him understand. Children clutched their parents' eyes wide with awe, witnessing a form of power far different from anything they had known. Reporters scrambled, recognizing they were capturing history, the lesson of respect, honor, and self-control being demonstrated in real time. The politician's face drained of color. For the first time, he realized that this confrontation was not about force or position, it was about principle. And principle was something he could not touch. He had misjudged the guard, believing that intimidation could break decades of discipline, years of service, and a lifetime of moral integrity. Even the surrounding crowd, who had been watching with a mix of curiosity and tension, now recognized the guard's authority, not because of rank, not because of uniform, but because of the invisible weight of honor and courage that radiated from his every movement. The subtlety of the guard's discipline was more powerful than any shout, more commanding than any display of wealth or influence. At that moment, the plaza seemed to breathe with the weight of history. Arlington itself bore witness, the polished marble reflecting sunlight onto a scene that would soon be replayed across social media, news channels, and personal stories alike. The guard's calm, controlled presence contrasted starkly with the politician's frantic, disoriented gestures. The lesson was clear: arrogance and entitlement are temporary. Discipline, honor, and moral courage endure. The guard's response had not required violence, confrontation, or public embarrassment. Instead, he had demonstrated the purest form of power, the ability to command respect through stillness, precision, and unwavering principle. The crowd, stunned and reverent, began to murmur quietly, a ripple of admiration spreading from the veterans to the children, from parents to tourists, from bystanders to reporters. In the silence that followed, the politician stumbled back, realizing he had been bested not by force, not by noise, but by the invisible authority of a man whose life had been dedicated to service, honor, and unwavering discipline. Arlington had once again reminded the world that true courage is quiet, and the most shocking responses are often the ones delivered with controlled composure rather than impulsive action. And as the crowd looked on, still hushed, one thing was unmistakably clear. The tomb guard had not only defended his post, he had defended the very ideals that Arlington represents. Respect, discipline, honor, and courage were not just ceremonial words. They were lived, embodied, and demonstrated in the most cinematic of ways. The turning point had arrived. The line had been crossed. The lesson had been delivered, and the crowd, silent and captivated, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A confrontation that would ripple far beyond the boundaries of Arlington, teaching that true power lies not in arrogance, wealth, or intimidation, but in calm, disciplined integrity. The plaza fell into a profound, almost sacred silence. The confrontation had stretched time itself, turning every heartbeat into a drumbeat of anticipation. Cameras clicked, capturing every frozen moment. Tourists and bystanders instinctively held their breath. Veterans exchanged knowing glances, and children clutched their parents wide-eyed, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The politician, humiliated, staggered back. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He had expected compliance. He had expected the guard to yield under pressure. But instead he faced the unyielding calm of someone who had lived through war, who had seen loss, and who understood the true meaning of honor. Then, without warning, one of the guard's fellow soldiers, quietly observing nearby, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, voice calm yet firm, "this behavior is unacceptable. You are interfering with a ceremonial post and showing disrespect to Arlington itself." The politician froze, now confronted not by a single disciplined man, but by the full weight of military protocol and the law backing it. The crowd's murmurs swelled into audible whispers, and the tension rippled through Arlington like a wave. Reporters leaned in, realizing they were witnessing more than a mere standoff. They were witnessing the unraveling of arrogance itself. The politician's entourage fumbled for answers, some snapping pictures, others whispering urgently, but the sense of authority had clearly shifted. The tomb guard remained still, his posture immaculate, his expression calm. But his presence alone was enough. There was no need for theatrics. Every step of the confrontation had already exposed the truth. Entitlement and aggression crumbled when faced with discipline, principle, and unwavering integrity. Security arrived, moving efficiently yet respectfully. They approached the politician with measured steps, signaling that the moment of reckoning had come. The man who had once wielded influence like a weapon now stood exposed, powerless in the face of procedural justice and moral authority. He attempted to protest, but his words were drowned by the collective realization of the crowd. Respect cannot be demanded, must be earned. A hush fell over the plaza as the politician was escorted away, his arrogance stripped bare, the cameras capturing every moment for posterity. The crowd's eyes shifted to the tomb guard, who, with a subtle adjustment of his stance, resumed his ceremonial position. The rifle rested perfectly, the salute flawless, and the stillness returned, more profound than before. In that moment, the lesson was crystal clear. Discipline is stronger than chaos. Honor surpasses aggression, and integrity commands attention even without words. Children whispered among themselves, repeating what they had seen. He didn't fight, but he won. Vetters nodded, some wiping their eyes, silently acknowledging the depth of courage and restraint on display. Even journalists, trained to find drama in spectacle, recognized the subtle heroism. The viral moment was not a fight, but a masterclass in character and principle. The guard's gaze drifted briefly to the old veteran whose truck he had fixed the day before. The man stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, nodding in silent respect. That small act of kindness, the repair of a humble vehicle, had revealed the guard's character. It was not just about strength or training. It was about integrity, empathy, and honor manifesting in every action. The world was watching, but the guard's eyes, unwavering, carried the weight of personal history, sacrifice, and moral clarity. The sun had climbed higher, illuminating Arlington in golden light. Shadows stretched across the marble paths, creating long, dramatic lines that seemed to etch the moment into memory. Tourists raised their phones, veterans adjusted their stances, and the crowd exhaled collectively, the tension dissolving into awe. In a quiet corner, a child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mum," she whispered, "he's a hero." And in that simple recognition, the true impact of the day became clear. Heroism is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, composed, and unwavering, a presence so commanding that it reshapes perception, restores faith, and inspires generations. The tomb guard remained in position, his posture unbroken, his expression calm. The viral moment had been captured not in a moment of confrontation, but in the subtlety of his discipline, the way stillness can speak louder than any shout, the way integrity can triumph without raising a hand. Arlington had borne witness to a timeless truth. Courage is measured not by domination, but by restraint. Power is defined not by arrogance, but by character. And as the crowd slowly dispersed, many whispered among themselves, sharing stories of what they had just witnessed. The politician, humiliated and removed, became a cautionary tale of entitlement. The tomb guard, steady and resolute, became a symbol, a reminder that the values of service, honor, and duty are immortal, that respect is earned, and that sometimes the most unforgettable victories are those achieved without aggression, without spectacle, but through the quiet demonstration of principle. The moment lingered long after the crowd had left. Arlington returned to its solemn rhythm, but the story had been written into memory, captured on cameras, and spread across the world. The tomb guard had defended more than a post. He had defended the very essence of honor, teaching that discipline, courage, and integrity can silence even the loudest arrogance, leaving a lasting mark on everyone who witnessed it. The plaza was quiet now, the tension of the confrontation replaced by a solemn calm that seemed almost sacred. Arlington's marble paths gleamed under the afternoon sun, the shadows stretching long and deliberate across the memorials. The crowd had dispersed, yet the echoes of what had just transpired lingered in the air. Collective realization that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The tomb guard remained in his post, rifle in hand, posture immaculate. To any casual observer, he was simply performing a ceremony, maintaining the dignity of Arlington. But for those who had been watching, those who had felt the subtle weight of discipline and courage in every motion, he was a living symbol, a reminder that true heroism often unfolds quietly, without applause or recognition. That his gaze drifted momentarily to the spot where the old veteran had stood the day before, the man whose broken-down truck had been repaired with steady hands and patience. That small act, humble and unnoticed at the time, had revealed something essential. Integrity is not performative. It is quiet. It is consistent. It is seen in small gestures as much as in grand acts. The guard understood this instinctively. Every repair, every respectful nod, every careful step in his duty was part of the same principle: service before self. A group of children lingered near the edge of the plaza, whispering among themselves. One little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and murmured, "He's a hero." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Heroism did not always roar. Sometimes it stood still, calm and unflinching, letting the weight of its presence speak for itself. Veterans nearby nodded in quiet agreement, understanding that the guard's restraint and courage had demonstrated a kind of bravery that few could ever truly comprehend. The colonel, who had been observing from a distance, approached silently. He stopped a few paces from the guard, then raised his hand in a crisp salute. The tomb guard responded with flawless precision, returning the gesture without breaking composure. The exchange was brief, almost imperceptible, but it carried immense weight. In that small acknowledgement, decades of service, sacrifices made, and battles fought both on the field and in life were honored and recognized. The guard lowered his gaze for a moment, fingertips brushing the dog tag resting on his chest, a private reminder of lost comrades, a note of reflection, and a medal of service all rested there together. Memories surged, friends who had never returned, nights spent in conflict zones, the weight of responsibility, and the small victories of everyday acts of honor. The confrontation, though public and viral, was merely another moment in a lifetime defined by steadfastness, patience, and courage. From the distance, the old veteran nodded again, and the guard offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. No words were exchanged, none were needed. They both understood that respect and honor were universal, transcending rank, age, and circumstance. The repair of a truck yesterday had led, indirectly, to this moment, a quiet testament to character, principle, and moral strength. The plaza, now calm and nearly empty, seemed to breathe in unison with the guard. Arlington had returned to its rhythm, yet the lessons lingered. Discipline had prevailed over chaos, integrity over arrogance, and quiet courage had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. Tourists would tell the story, veterans would recall the lesson, and children would carry the image of unwavering stillness as inspiration for years to come. As the tomb guard resumed his full ceremonial duties, a sense of completion settled over him. The viral moment, the confrontation, the humiliation of entitlement, it was all part of the larger narrative of service and honor. He did not seek recognition, but he understood the power of example. The lesson was clear: true heroism is not about applause, it is about unwavering principle. True strength is not in force, but in discipline, and true courage is often quiet, steady, and unshakable. Finally, as the afternoon sun cast its golden glow over the plaza, the guard's eyes softened ever so slightly. He glanced at Arlington's monuments, a silent acknowledgement of all who had served before him. He had defended not just a post, but the ideals that the cemetery embodied: honor, courage, and respect. And in that quiet, unspoken moment, he felt the profound satisfaction that comes from living by a principle that no challenge, no arrogance, and no power could ever shake. The world had watched, learned, and remembered. The tomb guard remained calm, disciplined, and unwavering, a hero not through spectacle, but through the quiet force of integrity and honor. Arlington had returned to its quiet, solemn rhythm, the echoes of the confrontation lingering like a whispered lesson in the marble air. The tomb guard stood tall, rifle in hand, posture flawless, embodying the values that had defined his life: honor, discipline, and unwavering courage. What the world had just witnessed was more than a viral moment, it was a testament to the power of stillness, integrity, and principle. In an era where bravado often overshadows true strength, the guard reminded everyone that heroism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits quietly, measured and patient, revealing its full impact only in moments that demand it. The crowd, the children, the veterans, and even those watching from screens far away, all had seen that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Discipline speaks louder than force. Integrity shines brighter than arrogance. That day, a simple act of kindness, the repair of an old veteran's truck, had set in motion a chain of events that exposed entitlement, highlighted courage, and reminded us all of the quiet heroes who stand for principles bigger than themselves. The tomb guard's actions weren't about recognition, fame, or power. They were about service, honor, and protecting the values Arlington symbolizes. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of respect, courage, and quiet strength, make sure to share it with others. Let it inspire more people to recognize that true heroism can be subtle, unassuming, and still unforgettable. Subscribe to support stories that celebrate integrity, service, and the incredible individuals who remind the world of what real courage looks like. Remember, tradition is not weakness, stillness is strength, and sometimes, the quietest actions leave the loudest mark on the world.